It is 3/12 of 2015. Alexander Kojeve is going to expand on the issue he brought up last lesson, being the aspect of modalities, societal modality, and how does a specific modality fit into his overall phenomenology of right. And he wants to address that within the realm of the reason of state, that realm of the directional sense. And so this is going to be specifically about the doctrine of social modalities, and it is additional clarification by Kojeve for his readers. He's very much keeping things tightly organized at this point. Our first moment is going to be the existing categories of the tri-layered reason of right that exists, and those three layers are right, state, and modal class. So the tri-layered categories are number one, right, and that, of course, we spent all of volume 1 discussing, and that's the formation of that notion of the real, notion of the true, as the posited idea of justice, the posited idea of justice. Now the second layer is the state, that is the governmental compromise. Remember, it's always a compromise, it's never perfect, as the currently existing speech act of government, speaking its legal rules and its correspondence to the notion of the real, which is going to be a partial correspondence. It's going to be a compromise. The third layer is what Kojeve calls modal class. Modal class means there are modal class elaborations of the idea of justice that are modality specific. That's how people communicate with external reality and try to contribute to the reason of state through their particular field of interest, through their particular modality of historical significance. This broadly determined ideal of justice exists here in our historical reality in the first moment as that which is awaiting the return of recognition that it might reach as an existential satisfaction. All of this going out of the notion into the actual world and trying to contribute to the reason of state, all of that work of the ideal and the positing is in anticipation of a return that the individual hopes that they will hear, yes, we affirm what you have posited, we recognize it as a universal. So that's the hope for a return of existential satisfaction, that your anthropogenic act of positing is recognized as universally significant for the concept of a human being. That your positing is recognized as the existential truth, that you have formulated a sign model that the people agree with and want to promote. So that's the hope for recognition. So now Kojeve takes us to the realm of the sphere of right. Of course, all the information is going to be in the moment, second moment, the moment number 2 here, because all of this teaching lately has been, in volume 2, has been directed toward the realm of actuality, the realm of historical reality, the realm where the reason of state is aligned up behind and within our sensate historical experience, and that experience is being informed by the directional sense of the reason of right, and we want to participate in that universal thrust. So, first of all, we in this moment we understand that recognition is a concept that Kojeve brings up. All modal class positings are nested in a more fundamental desire for recognition. That's the abbreviating concept. The desire for recognition encloses all of the individual modal class positings by different individuals. All social modal ideologies have a juridical character, advocating their rule of right. At this level of a particular social modality, the principle of justice eventually becomes, for Kojeve, the principle of equivalence. He explains that by pointing out that the principle of justice has two types. There are two types of the principle of justice. There's the master. He's going back to his original work. There's the master, which is the principle of equality, the ideal principle of equality. There's a slave personality of the self-consciousness, which is the person who does the positing. In reality, the person that gets involved, the person that goes, the self-consciousness that goes out of itself into historical reality, that's the slave self-consciousness. And that self-consciousness adheres to a principle of equivalence. Equivalence specifically addresses the desire for equivalent conditions of interaction. In other words, the desire of the self is to be on an equal playing field where all modalities have equivalent conditions of interaction. There's no bias against any modality. Now, the Modal Scholar is the concept that Kojeve brings up for how this positing takes place. The ideal is formed by the master self-consciousness as the modal scholar of reason, the scholar of reason within the particular modality, who through the axis flip becomes the slave self-consciousness of positing the modality rule of right. So it is the master-slave parable applied to the specific social modality, and first the self-consciousness as formation of the ideal will be the master, and will form a scholastic idea of reason and a scholastic version of justice within their particular modality. But then they flip to the necessity of positing and take up the slave self-consciousness that wants to posit an articulated modal rule of right. Kojeve says that this is articulated through the methodology of abstraction. Now, entrance points. Modal interactions always occur at social nodal points. Within the modal dialogue of interaction, relational juridical ideas are born that stimulate the notion of the real held in the dunamis potentiality. So that which is being done specifically within a self's modality will be a positing that does affect the more generic, abbreviated notion of the true and notion of the real, which is held as a, remember, a Greek dunamis potential. It's when it's held as the potential notion, it's dunamis. So that which is being done here through a specific modality will be a specific modality that will be re-internalized within that potential dunamis, and it is hoped that our positing within our modality of interest will affect this overall notion of the true that has been formed. So there are very specific entrance points. The modal interactions always occur at the nodal point, and so determination of the truth and determination of the real for Kojeve is always what he calls a broad influence, a broadly determined notion of the real and broadly determined notion of the real. It evolves out of that dialogue threshold that is not only going to contain other self-conscious selves that are also very uniquely targeted at universality and changing history for the good, but it also is going to be a dialogue threshold where you will have a tremendous diversity of modalities represented. You're not just going to be involved in a dialogue with your own specific modality, you're going to be involved with a broad determinism which will enclose ethics, economics, religion, you name it. every modality will be represented at that dialogue threshold, and so it's a very broadly determined, a very broadly defined notion of the true or notion of the real from many, many individual source modalities of society. Now, application is tangential. The juridical influence is created, Kojeve says, alongside modal interactions. Now, this is when, yes, you are within your own specific modality. The juridical desire to form the rule of right is a parallel directional sense that is parallel to the interactions of your specific modality. And so the rule of right is going to emerge through an ongoing dialectic that you will be engaged with other selves within your own modality. So let's say if your modality is philosophy, and you have been educated in and you participate within the realm or the sphere of philosophy, you will gather at the dialogue threshold with other philosophers. You will exchange ideas within that modality about what constitutes universality, what constitutes the existential anthropogenic act, what constitutes the formation of a true human being, what constitutes the concept of humanity, of history, of reality. But it'll all exist within the singular modality of philosophy, and there will be an emerging parallel line of directional influence that will have that juridical aspect to it that will develop as you continue in dialogue. It'll be a progressive evolutionary development. So it will progress through ongoing dialectic. And therefore, all modalities in the third moment are realized as elaborations. Modalities of right are realized as elaborations of the generic all-inclusive right that's formed in the realm of the notion of the true and the notion of the real. So elaboration is a return out of that tangential strike at the sphere of right. Your particular modality strikes the overall sphere of right at a tangential angle because you are a singular modality. You're not really a true universality. But you do strike that sphere of right, and so the modal class elaborations become a constant regathering into that tri-mutual space of the reason of state. All of these little individual modality tangents keep striking the sphere of right within historical reality, and they do contribute. They contribute not in a very direct way to universality because obviously they are separate, autonomous social entities, but they contribute their portion, their individual portion of the rule of right as a tangential strike against the sphere of right. And so it does begin to be gathered in, or regathered, within that tri-mutual space of the reason of state. And it's that desire for recognition that wants to take up that regathering. That desire for recognition is going to participate in that regathering of the ideas in order to revise the notion of the true, while at the same time enclosing every singular tangential strike of the sphere of right that carries its own individual contribution and voice of what constitutes a universal rule of right. All the modalities come together in this regathering. This causes a stimulated governmental interaction. The reconfigured satisfaction of right. Remember, after regathering all of these tangential contributions, it creates revision. It creates new configurations of the sign model of the notion of the true, the sign model of the notion of the real. And then that's, of course, is going to prompt a new positing. But before it prompts a new positing, it prompts space, a new space for interaction with governmental right. And so governmental right is forced to perceive these modal society aspects as contributors, as political friends. But the realization of right has to become concrete as speech act, as we've studied before. And the way it can do that, after these new configurations are in the mix, is that first of all, the right as the dunamis potential is modified. So the first thing that's going to happen is these tangential modality influences are going to be regathered, and the notion of the true and the notion of the real is going to be revised in the realm of positing. That's the dunamis realm of potentiality. And that creates what Kojeve calls the critical voice that speaks up against unjust, compromised governmental right, that needs to be nudged a little bit to move it a little closer toward universality, and to nudge it away from its compromising, less than universal current mode. So in the end, the governmental right must take up all modal society interests and make those modal society interests part of its own universality. The governmental right cannot be biased against or prejudiced against any specific modality. It can't be like the radical moral right of fundamentalist religion influencing politics to the point that they become prejudiced against other modalities of existence in the society. That kind of a radical moral majority type of a governmental right is a gross compromise and a gross inaccuracy of what a true universality should be. And so you can end up with a government that is biased against anything that doesn't fall within that modality. But in reality, if you're going to represent universality, every modal societal right gets its voice. Its tangential strike gets considered. Its contribution gets taken up as part of the governmental right claim to universality. No singular modal representation is to be prejudiced against. So we end up with a very good presentation here by Kojeve of how we need to further concentrate on universality and never neglect other modalities that we may not participate in, that we may not fully understand. We can make our offerings and our dialogue and our contribution to the universal voice of the right, but that contribution is going to be specific to our modality, and we cannot exclude all other modalities from also having their possibility of a contribution also to that overall tri-mutual layered reason of right that is the directional sense of history. And so it all makes a circle, of course. It circles us right back to moment one, the first moment, and we have now a reconfigured tri-layered categorical reality in history. It becomes reconfigured. And obviously that's going to be Kojeve's position because that's Hegel's position, the never-ending dialectical loop. And Kojeve says the same thing. We've got a never-ending dialectical loop that will pass out of this elaboration back into the tri-layered categories, back through modal points of application of the right, back to new elaborations, and back to the reconfigured categorical